I'm very, very pleased to be here, partly because I'm planning something for next year in which I'd really very much like people down here, Reigate and Red Hill, to be very much involved in. I've really got very angry about the whole Trident business. It's not for me any longer a little detached argument about this or that. I've got really angry that we could even begin to contemplate spending anything up to £100 billion on more nuclear weapons when everything is being cut. I've just had from our council today cuts for library cuts for social services, cuts for this, cuts for that. You all experience it. And yet this is a country that is going to spend this money on what? What's the mythology behind it that makes us think we've got to go on spending nuclear weapons money? Well, I jotted down today 6 different traditional reasons, and each one has got to be undermined and can be. The general populace thinks that nuclear weapons are safe. They don't go off by accident or by any miscalculation. They're safe until someone decides to use them. That's deep in people's heads. It's completely untrue. We've had, I won't say hundreds, we've had dozens of nuclear accidents, some of which could have caused a Third World War. We've had at least 2 human misunderstandings that very nearly did cause a Third World War. One of them in Cuba in 1962, when the third officer of a Soviet submarine actually saved all our lives, because the captain of the submarine and his number 1 said that because the Americans had cut out the ships above, the Americans were dropping actually hand grenades, not depth charges, to try and get the Soviet sub to come up. But the captain thought that they were dropping depth charges, and he said, because he wasn't in touch with Moscow, well then, in order to save the honour of the Soviet Navy, we will fire our nuclear-tipped torpedoes at the American aircraft carrier, and so we'll go down in glory. And the number 3, because they needed 3 permissions to fire these things, the number 3 said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't agree to that. We may be starting World War III." And this was in conditions of 40 degrees centigrade in that submarine, and a third of the crew had already fainted. And that man had met that judgment. We would have died if that had started, that World War III would have begun. There are 2 more seats up here. I'll pause in my eloquent flow. If anybody wants... Well, there's no point not congratulating yourself, is there, if you're going to be eloquent? Come on up. Another mythology, complete mythology of the 80s, was that numbers matter. You can move up the front, madam. There we are. They're much cheaper in the kitchen, as long as you do the washing up afterwards. Come along, make your way gingerly. Don't tread on the rest of the audience. There we are. The other mythology, or another one of the 80s, was that numbers matter. So if the Soviets had 25, we had to have 30,000. If they had 35,000, we had to have 45,000. And only completely ludicrous. Any one of them could destroy the world. We know what Hiroshima was, and that was a very small bomb, 12 kiloton. And even now we've got bombs of 100 kiloton deployed, with 25,000 in the world. But this numbers game was one of the driving forces, and the journalists kept it going all the time. That's why the SS-20 cruise missile nonsense began. They can fire an SS-20, so we've got to fire a cruise missile. Absolutely meaningless. Would you like me front view, or how would you like me? I could strip off if you're actually really keen.
Go for it.
There'll be a price for that. The third is that they keep us safe. Safe from what? I keep hearing, especially Tories, saying, "Oh, well, we've got to invest in Trident because you never know what the future's going to bring." Well, my God, of course you don't know what the future's going to bring. That's what it's called, the future. You can get some guesses, and I have some guesses. There will be climate change. There will be millions of refugees barging around the world. The polar ice caps are already melting. Our climate's going to change dramatically. Food crops are not going to be what they were. There are going to be all sorts of those ones we can see. But the Tories keep saying, but there's some distant way that somebody might... And what would we do if they did? Who are they anyway? And what are they going to do? Well, they may be terrorists, and I can't see what a nuclear weapon is going to do against the terrorists. We never thought of using it on Dublin, did we, or Belfast during the IRA affair. They're meaningless. Individual suicide, people don't protect us against accidents, don't protect us against miscalculations. What do they protect us against? Well, conceivably, if some state had a nuclear weapon and thought about attacking us with a nuclear weapon, conceivably, if we had a nuclear weapon, it might deter them. But since anybody using a nuclear weapon in any circumstances is actually mad, because a nuclear weapon discharges radioactive material which goes all over the world, and so the discharger of the nuclear weapon is just as vulnerable as the person on whom the impact comes. So it doesn't. You're only deterring someone who's sane enough not to use a weapon in the first place. Bonkers, isn't it? But that's what it is. It's better and cheaper not to have them, but there's no way of getting rid of them. That is nonsense. But I'm afraid we're all culpable, actually, for not putting that around enough. There is now, and there has been for the last 10 years, a perfectly good draft treaty, which this country won't even start negotiating on. Perfectly good draft treaty. It's about that fat, the whole treaty, and it could lead eventually to a signed convention with all the safeguards in place, like instant inspection on call from the United Nations. That's critical. But we've got to swallow our national pride and accept the fact that one day we'll be in the world where the Cubans or the Paraguayans or the Icelandicers can ring up the UN and say we're suspicious of what's going on in Aldermaston, we'd like to have an inspection within the week. That's possible. It's all in the treaty. But be a big thing for us to swallow, but nevertheless it's there. Other steps, of course, are to take the warheads off the missiles. This is all step-by-step arrangement. Cancel, register all fissile material, make it criminal for scientists to work on nuclear weapons. If it's criminal to plan to rob a bank or to spray your neighbour's house with machine gun bullets, it's criminal to make nuclear weapons. So anybody in that kind of technology. And we have some wonderful examples. Remember Joe Rotblat? Remember that name, Joe Rotblat, who was the Polish physicist, who refused in 1944. He was working on the bomb. He believed in nuclear deterrence. In other words, he thought that if we had a bomb, the Germans would never get one. But when he discovered the Germans hadn't even started, they were so far behind, they weren't even started on the bomb, Rotblat asked his boss, General Groves, why are we going on with this? And Groves said, because we're going to use it on some Japanese cities, with which Rotblat said, well, I'm not working on this project anymore. Conscientious objection is not just a matter for soldiers, it's a matter for scientists and everybody as well, what they decide to do.
And Einstein.
That's all right. Have you finished now? It's okay. I'm not finished either yet, so you have to be quiet.
No, sorry, mate.
Another one that you get quite often is that Britain is a major power and we'll lose our seat at the Security Council unless we have nuclear weapons. Well, that's cobblers. There's only one country had nuclear weapons when the Charter of the UN was signed, and that was the United States of America. It was the only one. It took the Soviets about 2 years to catch up. We, under really the malign influence of someone who was actually quite good-hearted, but Ernest Bevin, came into half a cabinet meeting when Attlee was there, and Attlee was against nuclear weapons, a number of civil servants. This is sometime in 1947, and Bevin had just had a very unhappy lunch with the American ambassador, because this was the time of Fuchs and the Soviet spies. And the American ambassador told Bevin, because your security is so feeble, we have decided not to share any more nuclear knowledge with you, the Brits. Well, that put Bevin into a real temper, and he came into this half meeting of the cabinet, and as Attlee was saying in a nice way, well, I don't think we can afford these things, chaps, Bevin hit the table and said, I don't care what they cost, I want them over here, and I want them with a bloody great Union Jack on top. Now, that's exactly the kind of ignorance which has driven the nuclear program in every country, I think. Certainly in France, they're French, British have got them, we've got to have them. In fact, I've got a memo of Thatcher, Nott, and one other, I've forgotten, Lord Carrington, three of them, having a discussion with a minuted memo. And they talk about the first Trident back in January 1980, and they talk about whether we should get another Trident, continue with this program, and so on. And all three of them were a bit dodgy about it, until one of them, I think, Nott said, well, if we don't go on with Trident, the French will be the only ones in Europe with an independent nuclear weapon. With which, of course, all three said, well, we can't have that. We can't. But the French can't be the only one. So off we went again, nationalistic. I used the word independent. They're not independent. The French system is independent, I think. The British system certainly isn't, because of the missiles. Every submarine's got, I think it's 8 missiles on board. 16, I've forgotten now. 16 actually on board. That those missiles come from the United States. Harold Wilson once called them the Moss-Bros deterrent. And anybody who's ever hired a dinner jacket will know exactly what he means. Moss-Bros deterrent. We have to take them back every 6 months to America. We get another set, not the same one, get another set, been refurbished, and it'll fit on the submarines. Well, is that independence? Americans could cut the system any minute, but nobody seems to take that up. Now, whether or not we can target the things without American technical assistance, I don't know. Whenever you go to the MOD, which I don't do very often these days, you can imagine, but whenever I used to go to the MOD and ask them that question, there was always a bit of a coughing around the table, and they said, "Oh, of course we can, old chap, of course we can, of course we can." But whether we actually can, I don't know. I rather doubt it. And then finally, we've got this strange feeling that we are privileged people, we who have nuclear weapons. That's 9 countries now. One of them certainly is up beyond the pale, North Korea, but they've got them and we're stuck with that. But somehow we think that we're entitled to them, but other countries are not. And the obvious argument about the whole Iran business is that we're telling them that they can't do what we've already done. Completely nonsense.
And they've got their own uranium.
Exactly. Any teacher in a school would know you can't tell one child can't do that, but the other child can. It's not possible, and that is what we're really trying to do. There are many ways in which we can do peacemaking with Iran and get Iran to realise the stupidity of going on with nuclear weapons. But threatening them with other nuclear weapons doesn't really make much sense. There was a wonderful story the other day from Israel of a young teacher, I think, in a settlement. And he, very worried about all this potential Iran war, he either twitted or tweeted or whatever you do, stuck it up in the air somehow, a message to people in Iran, to all those of goodwill. And the message was, "I'm your brother, I don't want to kill you, we're small people on a globe and we've got to share the globe and so on, I don't want to kill you." And then about a day later he got a message back from the outer space saying, "I'm an Iranian, I picked up your message and I agree with you, I don't want to kill you either." And so, and it built up wonderfully. I'm only just saying that because there are so many small things we can do to actually reduce world tension. I remember once when there was an Iranian man who had murdered another man, was about to be hung. They do them on cranes, it's dreadful. They can be hung. But the father of the murdered man, as apparently is the right in that country, the father said, "Well, I don't think taking this man's life will bring my boy back, so I don't wish to continue with this execution." And they stopped it. And I wrote to him, care of the Iranian embassy, and I sent him a picture book of England, and I said, "Thank you for your noble gesture." About a month later, I got a letter back from this man, beautifully typed, with an address, saying he much appreciated my message and he thought we should live in one world and live in peace and so on. I only bring that up just to show that small things absolutely count, absolutely count. Well, those are some of the standing arguments. Well, the biggest one for me, the most open door for all of us, is the amount of money that the whole thing's going to cost, replacing Trident. That is, I believe that it's wicked to threaten to murder hundreds of thousands of people. I think it's illegal to do it. I think all sorts of things like that. But that doesn't grip people by the short and curlies. But the idea of £100 billion, that most certainly does. And I want to have next year a month, perhaps starting at Aldermaston, because there is already going to be a demonstration in the 1st of April at Aldermaston, and call it the Trash Trident Month. And I want people to come to every major conurbation or whatever, and we'll have an outdoor speaking session, we'll have a petition to be signed on the spot, we'll have visits to the mayors, the local clergy, the Member of Parliament, the local councillors, all those things. So an outdoor meeting and an indoor meeting, and try and get the drums beating all around the country that Trident is a complete waste of money, and we should spend it in another way. All that sounds in a way rather off the cuff or off the wall or something here in nicely in rural England. I've just come back from Scotland, and believe me, the atmosphere is so totally different up there. Not only is 75% of the people up there want to get rid of Trident, which is based in Faslane. And it's not just not in my backyard. They don't want Trident anywhere. They happen to know there's nowhere in England to put the Trident submarine system, but they want it ended. And this is now a popular vote. Well, over here, I had, who was it, Polly Toynbee the other day, said, oh, nuclear disarmament could never be a winner and so on. I think it could be a winner if it's linked to the cost of the whole thing and the other things that we're being deprived of because of it. So the Scottish atmosphere, I really recommend you all to go for a little holiday in Scotland and have a chat around, because it really encourages one. The further you get away from Westminster, I think the happier everybody is. And that's certainly the feeling amongst the Scots, that they want to get away. So that's the plan for next year, a kind of trash Trident tour in as many places as possible. And I want local groups who've got imagination and energy and so on to pick on a day as part of this tour and build it up and make it the sort of thing that I've been talking about. I think this is one we could actually win. I made a great forecast long ago in 1980 that we could win over Trident, Cruise and something else. Well, I'm afraid we didn't any of them. But this one, I think we can actually win. We really can. People are now sympathetic. And it's more than that. It's not just a question of winning on nuclear weapons. I think people are yearning for a different kind of world in which we don't have this kind of threat from one country to another, a world based on justice, on a United Nations that actually works, and where war has been consigned to history. I think that's not mad now, after the nonsense of Afghanistan and the 2 Iraq wars and possibly an Iranian war and heaven knows what else as well. People are fed up with it, which is why I think our present government is ratcheting up militarism in every way it can. We're getting. Have you ever seen a news broadcaster without a red poppy on? Never. Impossible nowadays. You can't do anything without wearing. Go to the loo. You've got to wear a red poppy. It's almost compulsory. We now have an Armed Forces Day. I've been in the Armed Forces. I'm not knocking the Armed Forces at all. But what we're seeing is the temperature being brought up so that people don't talk about what they're doing or what they're being asked to do. They talk about the bravery of the individuals. And that's true. Of course it's brave. But people should never forget that 90% of the people who die in war today are not members of anybody's armed forces. They're not. They're civilians who don't know what the hell's going on. Hit by a drone at a wedding party or something. That's who they are. 90%. When we had a little campaign in the movement for the abolition of war about Remembrance Sunday, I don't suppose it'd work this time, but it'll drip, drip, it will work eventually. And what I kept saying around the country was, if you could bring all the dead back from all these wars, bring them all back, and get them like Sandy Spencer, and bring them alive in front of you again, what would they tell you? They'd say, for God's sake, stop war. Don't have wars. That's what they all say. That's what they all say. The oldest World War I veteran who died last year sometime, all he had to say at meetings was, don't have any more bloody wars. That's what he said. He didn't care a hoot about the First World War. But he said that. We've got to learn a lot from history. We've just concluded, I think, a very successful, the 6th Peace History Conference in Manchester. 140 people came. That's the biggest we've had. The first 5 have all been in the Imperial War Museum. Now, I think that's a miracle on its own, to have a peace gathering in the Imperial War Museum. Isn't that an indication of the way in which people are changing their minds? The director of the Imperial War Museum was a very nice woman. She said, I've been lumbered with a museum which got the 3 worst names you can think of: Imperial, War and Museum. She said, I can't change it, I'm stuck with it. And I think that there's a yearning on all sides for a different way of doing things. Peace history, I think, and I'm going to stop on this one because it's a hobby horse of mine, I've gone a long time. Peace history is, I think, absolutely critical to understanding. We have so many false dogmas stuffed into our heads about war that help people promote the war. Hitler, people like us, appeasement people, we made Hitler possible. Ever heard that before? Regular. It's completely untrue. The people who actually supported Hitler were the right wing in this country. We were selling nickel and rubber 4 times the usual quantity to Hitler in July of 1939. Most of Hitler's weapons were actually bought from the United States of America in that period. We were the ones, when there was a moment of hope at the League of Nations Disarmament Conference of 1932, we were the ones who actually stopped it going forward. Not President, but Hoover, whatever he was then, Hoover proposed a major plan of cutting armaments by half all over the place. The British were the first to say no. Why? Because we weren't going to have the Americans with a bigger navy than we've got. Childish, but that's what it was. There's a wonderful woman called Sylvia Pankhurst. You remember Sylvia Pankhurst, anybody? Sylvia Pankhurst lived up in Epping. And you can still see her contribution to peace history outside her little cottage in those days, by the little rural lane. She built a concrete bomb. Bomb's about that high, still there. And underneath it, she said, thanks to the vision of the British government or something, in preventing limitation on bombers in 1932, we can now go on bombing the Africans as before. Sarcasm. But it's a really interesting bit of sarcasm. She put it there. Now the cottage is gone, there's a block of flats going up, the main road's there, but this monument is still there in the middle of it. We've got to learn from our own history. Who's the first British Nobel Peace Prize winner? Any idea? Dead silence. Don't blame you. First British Nobel Peace Prize winner lies in a cemetery in Hampstead covered in blackberry bushes. You can't even get there without cutting your way through the blackberry bushes. A man called Randall Kramer. And why did he get it? He got it because he was promoting arbitration. He was a member of Parliament. He wanted to settle disputes through arbitration. And his work, and that of many other people, whose names are also forgotten, led eventually to the International Court of Justice and actually on to the International Criminal Court. We've come a long way in building the structures in which peaceful resolution is possible, and I think we have to continue with that. So the Trash Trident campaign, for me, is part of a bigger picture, and that is to build a world where we use the resources of the world for the real needs of human beings. You heard a lot about development goals. They all talk about development, poverty, education, health, all these things, and it's going to cost X billion. It'll cost about a quarter of what the world now spends on war. We spent $1.7 trillion, nearly 2 trillion. 1,000 billion is a trillion. 1,000 billion, $1.5 trillion, or $1.75 trillion we spend on war. It's mad, isn't it? And that makes me very angry. And I hope we can finish this evening by getting very angry indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.